Spread like a vast network of arteries and veins across nearly half a continent, the Mississippi is a pathway of life, a changing kaleidoscope of the intersecting destinies of living things. In nature, no creature or element stands alone. Each life is the sum of its interaction with all the forces that bear upon it. The river, too, is part of the web of forces in which it plays a role. It is the servant of the rain, the seasons that melt the snow, that fills the river, that floods the valley, that enriches the land, that feeds the creatures that dwell upon it. The river serves many roles, many duties, is part of many lives beyond its own. The bird and the snake, the raccoon and the fish, the trees and the wetlands. Even man, for he, uniquely gifted in nature, is no less a part of it. He, too, is locked in common interdependence with all other living things. Usually more familiar with the creatures of the sea, Jean-Michel Cousteau this morning speeds by motor sled to an appointment with a bear. One of the Mississippi system's more northerly residents, she too has had to join the rest of Earth's creatures who are banded, wear radio collars, or pay taxes. Though she is quietly hibernating with her lively cubs, naturalist Lynn Rogers takes no risks, prudently administers a sedative.
She's really sleeping soundly.
Sound asleep, huh?
Yeah. See, she's used to feeling pricks and everything from the claws of the cubs climbing on her fur.
So it doesn't feel any different?
Yeah.
Briefly, Jean-Michel plays nursemaid to the cubs.
What's your problem? Huh?
Notice that they have blue eyes at this age.
And
they'll stay like that for almost a year yet. And they'll slowly turn brown.
Tremendous feat already.
Yeah, as soon as they come out, they'll start climbing trees. First, like play, but if there's any danger, then they'll try harder. Let's take the mother out.
Carefully, Rogers prepares to replace the collar by which the bear's movements can be tracked.
Now we'll try to make this about the same size. She's used to it. It's plenty loose. We measure it so it's just loosely snug around their head. Then it's real loose on their neck.
Ooh, hanging on.
Got a pretty white thing.
So cute.
While the bear takes her deep winter sleep, other creatures follow other patterns. Westward on the upper Missouri, a tributary of the Mississippi 100 miles longer than the main river itself, the birds again are gathering in clamorous flocks, pausing in their yearly southward flight. Noisy, competitive, they are not above a shameless act of brigandage in broad daylight. When an enterprising young cormorant catches a fish, the larger pelicans instantly seize it. Then track this talented fisherman in case he catches another. Nearby on the Missouri, the Cousteau team prepares to descend into the waters of the river, so often clouded with its burden of silt that it has been called the Big Muddy. Yet they are less fortunate than the pelicans. In the river's depths, they find only one or two solitary fish. They find only a few scattered, fractured bones, possible relics of early Indian hunts in which small bands of buffalo were sometimes stampeded over riverside cliffs to provide their winter's food. Later, intent on subduing Indian resistance, white hunters all but exterminated the herds. By 1890, they had nearly vanished, an estimated 60 million buffalo reduced to hardly 1,000. Today, the buffalo herds are running again, thanks to such enterprising enthusiasts as Roy Hauk at the Triple U Ranch near Pierre, South Dakota. Strictly protected, the greatest danger to the several herds scattered across the western United States and Canada is the intermittent threat of brucellosis, a disease which causes abortion in infected cattle and requires destruction of the animals to prevent epidemic. To Dominique and his companions, Hauk tells of the building of his herd.
Well, we always kind of liked them, and we got this ranch in '59, and there's quite a lot of room here, and we had a chance to buy a few, so we bought them just to kind of as a hobby, more or less. They were so impressive on us, so we just kept getting more involved in them.
How many buffalo are there today?
Oh, it's hard to tell exactly. We have what we call the National Buffalo Association, which has nearly around 600-700 members that have buffalo. And from the records that they keep, there's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 60,000-70,000 in the United States.
Descending the fabled river that wanders like a drunkard's path across 7 states before it joins the Mississippi, the Cousteau team unloads the amphibian Jacare, prepares to make camp near the White Cliffs section in Montana. Long used as range country, now vastly changed by dams and reservoirs, the state is no longer the old frontier. Yet here and elsewhere along the course of the upper Missouri, there remain areas of open country, of high prairie and river canyons, little changed since Lewis and Clark came this way during their historic exploration. Captain Cousteau tells of a later journey he makes, not by the river, but by air.
It is nearly 2 centuries since Lewis and Clark gazed in awe at the apparitions that hem the river. I too share their astonishment. Surrounded by these walls and spires and figures, I feel myself in the ruins of some vast and ancient edifice, a museum in time. They are not, of course, acts of the imagination made by conscious intent. They are created out of the rudimentary processes of nature, the hardening of the earth under mighty pressures, the shuddering impact of tectonic movement, the river relentlessly cutting its way through layers of rock, the long, slow carving of these pinnacles by wind and rain, by summer heat and winter cold. Here, as elsewhere, nature remains an unfinished experiment that goes on reshaping our Earth, that has created 10 million varied living organisms, and many that have come and gone. In his restless imagination, man too is embarked on a ceaseless quest, an endless testing of new discoveries in science, of new forms of art, of new technologies, even the vehicles by which he moves about the world and into space. Yet always there is the impulse to pose, arrest the image, fix it in time. A great sculptor once said, "I only release the form that is in the stone." But so in this crumbling landscape do the river and the wind, and they never stop.
At camp in the fading afternoon, life is getting down to essentials. The wine is breathing, Xavier Desmier is fixing the coffee, Don Santi is tending the fire, and Dominique Simeon and Raymond Coll, who pride themselves as at least one-star chefs, prepare the steaks. A dinner simple, but probably more elegant than was once shared by the Lewis and Clark party who camped here 180 years ago. Then the meat was game, usually buffalo, elk, deer, or even grizzly, though sometimes it was a toss-up whether bear or hunter would be eaten. Yet, facing no grizzlies or hostile Indians, Cousteau and his companions find amusement, as other travelers have done since early caravans. They tell jokes and tall tales, find the man who can play an instrument, and startle the surrounding wildlife with song. Secure in the light Zodiacs, the Cousteau team travels the Missouri, a river famed for the heavy toll of wrecked and sunken vessels which it often has exacted since the mid-1800s. In low water or high, it was a riverman's nightmare, a treacherous course of constantly shifting channels, mazes of sandbars, drifting trees, and assorted snags and traps of every kind. Near Bismarck, North Dakota, the Cousteau team descends to examine the remains of one of the hundreds of shallow draft vessels lost in passage to upstream ports. But in the murky water, they find little, only a shattered hull and a few rotting timbers. Among the lost vessels, perhaps the most famous was the Bertrand, which left St. Louis in spring of 1865. Striking a snag some 25 miles north of Omaha, the Bertrand sank, bound for Montana, where gold recently had been discovered. In 1968, the Bertrand was found not in the river, which had shifted, but in wet bottom land a mile away. Much of the cargo had survived the century. Sorted and cleaned, the array of recovered cargo items offer the Cousteau team a rare glimpse of another place and time. From skillets to wagon grease, cannonballs and wheel spokes, shovels, knives, churns, patent medicine, pickles, doorknobs and keys. The necessities that followed the dash for gold. In the Black Hills of South Dakota, discovery of gold by General George Custer's expedition in 1874 brought riches and despair. Founded in the rush that followed, Homestake remains the greatest gold mine in America. Because of the rush, the nation broke a treaty, forced the Indians to give up their sacred medicine land. 2 years later, the tribes would exact vengeance at the Little Bighorn. Again, led by the amphibian Jacare, the Cousteau team follows the river eastward across the Montana Midlands. But now it begins to find radical changes in the control of the once truant Missouri. At Fort Peck, it approaches the first of a series of 7 major dams that today regulate the waterway. Now, with Captain Cousteau and Jean-Michel, the team prepares to explore the depths at the foot of the dam that contains the largest of the man-made lakes, Fort Peck Reservoir, a great inland sea nearly 200 miles long.
Commandant, voici le reste de votre équipement. La première des choses, c'est de mettre vos chaussures au frais. La couverte, ça, Louis? Oui.
In a day that has grown gray and chill, the Cousteaus and their companions adjust air tanks and masks. Then, one by one, they drop over the side. Attended by the powerful lights, the divers descend through the murky water. Sometimes swept by currents along the bottom, they at first find little. Then they begin to encounter occasional schools of blue suckers, a strongly migratory fish that once ascended great distances during spawning runs, which now are often blocked by the dams. Now, a shovel-nosed sturgeon is found quietly lurking on the bottom. Member of an ancient group of fishes, of which the white sturgeon sometimes reaches a length of 20 feet and a ton in weight, the shovel-nose is comparatively diminutive, rarely exceeding 5 pounds. Instead of scales, he wears a kind of armor, characteristic rows of bony plates. Usually seeking open channels in larger rivers, the sturgeon roams the bottom, raking the sand or mud with its barbels, then vacuuming the snails, crawfish, and insect larvae through its tube-like mouth. Overfishing, pollution, and the inhibiting effect of dams that block spawning runs have all contributed to the overall decline of freshwater resources. With the glimpse of one lone errant trout, the team at last returns to the surface, finds new dilemmas on its continuing journey. Despite the increased storage provided by the reservoirs, water remains in short supply. At Owyhee Dam, South Dakota Governor William Janklow tells Jean-Michel the problems of sharing.
Who owns the water?
Everybody owns the water. The water's owned by all the people of America together. Who has the right to use it? We have priorities as to who can use it, but everybody owns the water. And people think that first in time is first in right to the point where you can use it to the exclusion of all others. But that's the reason that the Water Law of America was passed a long time ago, that provided that the waters basically of America belong to all the people of America. And our law was passed in South Dakota a long time ago and said the waters in South Dakota belong to all the people of South Dakota, even if it goes through my land or even if it goes under my land.
The rights seldom seem to apply to the Indian. Once free-roaming nomadic people, the Northern Plains tribes followed the buffalo. But conquered by the white man's westward tide, they would be driven from their homelands and sacred places, exiled to Badlands or the dry landscapes of Pine Ridge, Rosebud, Standing Rock, or a score of other reservations, prisoners in their own land. Today, Indians of Pine Ridge are left with slim hope, poor water rations. Living outside this settlement, Mrs. High Hawk can find only brackish, sometimes polluted water for her family's use each day. Robert Fasthorse tells Don Santee of the Indians' deprivation and bitterness.
What she's saying is that this is the only place she can get water, and there's no other place around, and she has need of it for her use in her home, just to live by, and to cook and for laundering.
Who do you feel owns the water in the Missouri River?
Traditionally, Indian people did not own the land or water or air, but due to the treaties, we've had to develop the concept of owning property. But we all used to live in harmony. We referred to the earth as our mother, and the water is sacred to us. And how can you own sacred things? We lived with them. They lived with us.
The Indian still speaks to the gods with drums, still dances to pray. In feather and painted face, in sacred pouch and beaded charm, he carries the talismans of his faith, of his part in all the world of nature. In powwow and sundance, the Western tribes still find a common strength. Even though the black hills they call Pasapa, their holy place, bear the carved figures not of gods, but of 4 American presidents. Nearby, medicine man Pete Catches tells Dominique and Don how the Indian sees his world.
Our world is different. As the Creator, the divine being made all things, In his manifestation, he made whatever he made was beautiful until man came and destroyed it and tarnished it with his acts of violence or whatever. The smartest creature on the face of the earth is perhaps the creature that destroys, continually destroying that which is good, that which is created by the Great Spirit, that which was beautiful at one time cannot ever be the same again. I would like to sing a song. Lena yuha taipina mani peloyo hey chanu pawai wakayai yuha taipina mani peloyo hey Lena yuha taipina mani peloyo hey hoy tata gaya oyate wai wakaya wichoni wa toke jai gluha taipina mani peloyo hey Lena yuha taipina mani peloyo
Traveling along the Missouri River in their Zodiac, the Cousteau team moves through a season of change, of falling leaf and crusting ice. From Montana to Minnesota, the air and waters are filled with restless life. Pausing briefly at the head of the broad central flyway, millions of varied geese, swans, ducks, pelicans, and other birds are gathered for the beginning of a great annual migration. A few, like these Canada geese, are sometimes taken by surprise. Soon, each feels the summons. In small flocks and large, the birds take off, following the Mississippi southward to Louisiana, some flying on as far as Yucatan and Central America. It is an ancient journey, its map drawn on inherited memory. But the world beneath their wings has changed vastly since their ancestral journeys. Here, in less than 2 centuries, or 3 human lifetimes, man has spread his cities and raised his towers. Today, his smoke stains the sky, spreads acid rain in distant lakes and forests. The wastes of farm, factory, and mill pollute the river. Necessary protective measures are great and costly. At St. Louis each day, 320 million gallons of river water must be passed through a series of settling and cleansing basins, then chemically treated for use by the city. Division Engineer Thomas Rothermich describes the process.
Drain the basins several times a year and push those chemicals back into the river.
As we go down the river, these compounds, these chemicals, these minerals are being picked up, taken away from the water so we can make it drinkable and put back into the river system.
Right.
So ultimately it goes all the way down the Mississippi into the ocean.
Correct.
In a series of water samples taken along the full length of the Mississippi, Dr. Richard Murphy of the Cousteau staff finds an array of man-made chemicals that represent an increasing hazard. Often derived from pesticides, plasticizers, and heavy metals, they sometimes join with water cleansing chemicals to form even more toxic combinations in the water we drink. Research chemist Dr. John Lasseter tells Jean-Michel of dangers to the unborn.
What would you recommend the man in the street, future mothers, do to try to avoid that and protect the generations to come?
Well, I think that now that we understand that these chemicals can cross the placenta and show up in the newborn, I think the mother must be much more careful and select what she takes into her body, whether it be the drinking water, the air that she breathes, the types of food that she eats, and so forth, and certainly smoking and other things. Many of those chemicals can cross into the placenta and into the newborn and can cause an effect.
At Kaskaskia, Captain Cousteau finds that the future wears a happy face. Its children are accustomed to dangers we can see, not the lethal threats that stalk us in the dark. Once the capital of Illinois, Kaskaskia was a hub of Midwest commerce. But by 1898, successive floods had devoured the city. Today, it is a village of 90 souls, a story told by the river. Despite massive restrictions imposed by the Army Corps of Engineers, the river still often goes its way. In 1984, protected by higher levees, Kaskaskia was not threatened. But up and down the great river system, the floods broke its banks and poured across the surrounding lowlands, leaving a catalog of disaster in their wake. Broken highway and rail communications, thousands evacuated. In 4 states alone, it would cost billions of dollars in losses, destroy crops, damage 7 million acres of farmland, carry away precious topsoil. As the amphibian Jacare enters the wasteland at Big Lake near St. Joseph, Missouri, the Cousteau team finds communities caught in a pause, filled with the artifacts of everyday life, but fixed in a deep, encompassing silence. Here, the sunken street is lined with shade trees, but no children play. Cars and trucks stand by, a parody of usefulness. A public telephone booth takes no calls. Only the residents of a birdhouse stand safe above the waters. Yet in common danger often lies unity. Neighbor helping neighbor to escape or to find a lost pet. Soon they will return, stare at drowned rooms and ruined appliances, and start again. Meanwhile, at the edge of disaster, there is always one who stays behind to mow the lawn. Near Vicksburg, the Corps of Engineers has reduced the river to manageable size, 1 mile long. Here, in miniature, the Corps is trying to forestall the Mississippi's long tendency to transfer its flow to the adjoining Chafalaya River and shorten its path to the Gulf by 200 miles. Engineer Wayne O'Neill tells Cousteau of the effort.
The main thing that we were doing was going to put in the delta that the computer models predicted and see what changes would be happening in the floodplains back up above. See if there were going to be significant changes in the stages and the amounts of water that were going to be let through the Gulf of Mexico. Now it's just roughness. We lay it out originally from the aerial photographs, and then we come back and adjust it according to get the correct stage. If we need more flow through this area, we'll thin it out. If we need less flow, we'll put more wire in and heavy it up. The closest connection between the Chafalaya River and the Mississippi is right in this area here. This structure right here is the old river control structure. And there's a man-made channel that actually ties these two together.
At present, the so-called old river control structure is designed to keep the flow of the Mississippi to the Chafalaya at an acceptable level. But there are river control experts who feel that these measures will never prevail, that all of man's costly and painfully erected defenses will fail, that ultimately Old Man River will have his way. Going aloft, Jean-Michel views the results of a massive labor that often seems to have converted the Mississippi into a paved waterway. Determined to arrest the river's untidy, meandering habit, the Corps of Engineers has sometimes employed extreme measures. Intent on maintaining a navigable channel, the Corps has had to stabilize the banks, prevent their erosion by current and flood. After a century of experiment with other techniques, the Corps, in a prodigious effort, is sheathing miles of vulnerable shoreline with concrete mats, now stored in vast holding sites along the middle Mississippi until needed. Viewing the scale of the enterprise, Captain Cousteau is amazed.
Distribute that load.
In a carefully orchestrated series of steps, the slope of the bank is first carefully graded. The concrete mats are then brought from storage by truck or barge. Lifting the mats from their conveyor, great gantry cranes transfer them to the shore. There, the mats are carefully joined by pneumatic drills and staples. Then, at last, lowered along the bank. Later, broken rock, or riprap, is placed upon the mat to help hold it securely in position against the river's flow. Because of these Herculean efforts, the river banks have been greatly stabilized and the traffic of barge, freighter, and tanker accordingly made more secure. Yet there is a penalty. Satellite pictures reveal that the Great Delta is shrinking, in part because of the confined river's swifter flow. The silt it carries no longer builds new land, but is uselessly dropped over the edge of the continental shelf. At Ville Platte, a horn announces that in Cajun country, knighthood is still in flower. Less lethal than medieval French jousts, in which mounted horsemen tried to skewer each other at full gallop, the contestants at Ville Platte's autumn tournament try only to capture 7 suspended rings. Judged both on speed and number of rings taken, the winners today receive their awards from a native of the France they left over 3 centuries ago.
We have Jean-Michel Cousteau doing the honors and presentation.
Later, at Clinto's bar, the music and dancing begins. For people of the farmlands and the delta marshes beyond, the rhythms are slower and the old ways are long in dying. Still playing at medieval jousts, still speaking of patois of the France their ancestors left long ago, they seem spellbound in the past. In the marshes that hem the crazy quilt of farms, returning shrimp trawlers sort out trash fish for the birds, then sail home in the sunset. In swamp and bayou, the cypresses too seem caught in a hush, a world apart. Here, over the centuries, diverse creatures of air and water have become a community of neighbors, respectful of each other. Among the water hyacinths and rotting stumps, a nutria goes his way. A purple gallinule hunts amid the pads, turning each leaf in search of hidden prey, each on a timeless errand. Yet there is a stopwatch on eternity. Once built of river silt, their world is shrinking. In 2 decades, half their freshwater marsh has been lost. Today, oil-field canals have opened the way for saltwater intrusion, destroying the wetlands from within. But as yet, the gallinule is unaware that for it, time may be coming to an end.
I feel so bad, I got a worried mind. I'm so lonesome all the time. Since I left my baby behind on Blue Bayou. Saving nickels, saving dimes, working till the sun don't shine, looking forward to happier times on Blue Bayou. I'm going back someday, come what may, to Blue Bayou, where the folks are fine and the world is mine on Blue Bayou, where those fishing boats with their sails afloat, if I could only see that familiar sunrise through sleepy eyes, how happy I'd be. Wanna see my baby again, wanna be with some of my friends. Maybe I'll feel better again on Blue Bayou. Will I never be blue? My dreams come true. On Blue Bayou.
Always the Mississippi has served many creatures, but today man's needs prevail. Homeward bound through the mouth of the river, Calypso moves through waters central to the life of a nation. Upon the river, man has imposed vast and sometimes useful changes. With dike and dam and jetty, he has transformed it to serve his commerce, his safety, his pleasure. But in the process, as Jean-Michel notes, man too is changing.
Today, man is finding that he intrudes on natural processes at his risk. That fixed structures to control the river may only enlarge the penalties they may later inflict. He is learning that many ecosystems, the lives of plant and man and animal, are joined in fragile balance. that in nature we often must share or die. And often he is learning, as if for the first time, that sometimes the river is wiser